Imagine that everything you were taught about salvation was only the surface. Imagine that beyond rituals, beyond doctrines, beyond the visible structure of religion, there exists a direct path, a path inward, that leads not to a distant heaven, but to the source of all existence itself. What if Jesus was not only teaching morality, compassion, or obedience, but revealing a precise spiritual method? What if hidden within his words is the key to entering what ancient mystics called the monad, the indivisible source, the absolute unity beyond form and duality? Stay with me until the final part, because what we will uncover at the end is the most powerful and transformative revelation of all, the one that can fundamentally change the way you understand consciousness, God, and your own identity. If you feel called to explore hidden wisdom, ancient truths, and the deeper spiritual meanings behind sacred teachings, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this message with someone who is ready to awaken. Comment below. Do you believe Jesus was pointing to something beyond religion? Your reflection may open doors for others. Throughout history, the concept of the monad has appeared in esoteric traditions. In Neoplatonism, Plotinus described the one as the ultimate principle beyond being and non-being. In early Christian mysticism, figures like Origen and later Meister Eckhart spoke of a divine ground within the soul, a spark untouched by the material world. Even the Nag Hammadi texts, discovered in the 20th century, contain passages suggesting that Christ came not merely to forgive sins, but to awaken remembrance. But what is the monad? The monad is not a place. It is not a throne in the sky. It is the indivisible origin from which all multiplicity emerges. It is unity before division, light before fragmentation, being before thought. When Jesus said, "I and the Father are one," was he claiming exclusivity, or revealing a state of consciousness available to those who truly understand? Scholar Elaine Pagels, in her studies on early Christian mysticism, noted that many early followers of Jesus interpreted his teachings as an invitation to inner transformation, rather than institutional authority. The Gospel of Thomas records Jesus saying, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you." This does not sound like external salvation. It sounds like initiation. Could it be that entering the monad is not about traveling somewhere, but about dissolving what is false within us? Think about this. Why did Jesus constantly speak in parables? Why did he say, "Let those who have ears hear"? Perhaps because the teaching was layered. On the surface, a moral lesson. Beneath it, a metaphysical map. And here is the first mystery we must confront. The monad cannot be entered through belief alone. It requires inner alignment, silence, self-knowledge, a radical transformation of identity. Before we go deeper, ask yourself, who are you beneath your name, your history, your fears, your desires? If everything external were stripped away, what would remain? In the next part, we will begin to uncover the specific teachings of Jesus that point directly toward this inner ascent. Teachings that were often misunderstood, suppressed, or reduced to symbolism. And as we progress, the final revelation will show you why entering the monad is not an escape from the world, but the fulfillment of your true nature. When Jesus spoke of being born again, most interpret it as a moral renewal. But what if he was pointing to something far more radical, a complete ontological shift, not an improvement of the personality, but a transcendence of it? Consider his conversation with Nicodemus in the Gospel of John. Unless one is born of water and spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God. Water cleanses the visible. Spirit transforms the invisible. The teaching suggests not external compliance, but interior metamorphosis. The Greek word used for spirit, pneuma, also means breath and wind, something unseen yet undeniably real. To be reborn of spirit is to awaken to the dimension of consciousness that precedes identity. Plotinus described the ascent to the one as a return inward, a withdrawal from multiplicity into simplicity. He wrote that the soul must become one in order to perceive the one. This mirrors Jesus' declaration, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." Purity here does not mean moral perfection. The word used implies singleness, an undivided interior state, a consciousness no longer fragmented by fear, desire, and ego. Entering the monad, then, is not an act of physical movement. It is a collapse of inner division. Why did Jesus retreat into the wilderness for 40 days? Why did he often withdraw to pray in solitude before major events? Silence was not incidental. It was preparation. In silence, the false self begins to dissolve. In silence, the noise of multiplicity fades, and the awareness of unity becomes perceptible. Scholar Bernard McGinn, one of the leading historians of Christian mysticism, observed that many early contemplatives understood union with God not as symbolic language, but as experiential reality. They believed the human soul contained a depth where divine and human meet, not metaphorically but ontologically. If this is true, then Jesus was not simply describing an external Father in the heavens. He was revealing a pathway to the divine ground within. Notice how often he emphasized inner seeing. The lamp of the body is the eye. If your eye is single, your whole body will be full of light. Again, the idea of singleness appears. Unity, integration. The eye becoming single suggests perception without fragmentation, awareness without internal conflict. Ask yourself, how divided are you within? How much of your suffering arises from conflicting desires, identities, and fears? What if entering the monad requires first recognizing the illusion of separation inside you? Here lies another profound mystery. The ego cannot enter unity. The persona cannot cross the threshold. The self, constructed by memory and conditioning, cannot experience the indivisible source. It must surrender. And yet Jesus never taught self-hatred. He taught self-denial, a phrase often misunderstood. To deny oneself is not to despise oneself, it is to release the false center, to let go of the narrative that says, I am separate. In the next part, we will explore the hidden meaning of the phrase, the kingdom of God is within you, and how this statement directly encodes the teaching of inner ascent into unity. There we will begin to see how Jesus revealed not only the existence of the monad, but the precise inner doorway to it. When Jesus declared, the kingdom of God is within you, he was not offering poetic comfort. He was dismantling the very architecture of externalized spirituality. If the kingdom is within, then the path is inward. If the kingdom is within, then the gate is consciousness itself. The Greek term translated as within can also mean in your midst. This dual meaning is powerful. It suggests both an interior reality and a presence already here, closer than breath. Origen, one of the earliest Christian theologians, wrote that the divine Logos dwells in the depths of the soul, and that the true temple is not built of stone, but of awareness. This idea echoes the Hermetic maxim, as above, so below, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, the principle that the macrocosm and microcosm reflect one another. What if the monad is not somewhere beyond the stars, but the very ground of your being? In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus says, the kingdom of God does not come with observation. It cannot be seen with ordinary perception. It does not arrive with spectacle. This statement alone overturns the expectation of a dramatic external revelation. Instead, it implies subtlety, interior recognition, a shift so quiet that only the attentive heart perceives it. Meister Eckhart, the medieval mystic, spoke of a divine spark in the soul, a point untouched by time, untouched by multiplicity. He claimed that in this ground, the soul and God are one. His teachings were controversial because they implied direct union without mediation. Yet his language resonates with Jesus' words, I and the Father are one, not two beings merging, but a recognition of original unity. Pause and reflect. If the kingdom is within, what keeps you from perceiving it? Distraction, identification, fear, the constant noise of thought, the belief that you are only your body, your memories, your roles. Entering the monad requires a reversal of attention. Instead of moving outward toward objects, achievements, and validation, consciousness turns inward toward its source. This is why Jesus emphasized watchfulness. Watch and pray. Watch what? The movements of the inner world, the impulses, the attachments, the illusions. St. Augustine, centuries later, confessed, "I was searching for you outside, but you were within." His realization mirrors the ancient path of return described in Neoplatonism, the journey from multiplicity back to unity. Here we encounter another profound layer. The monad cannot be entered by accumulation. It is entered by subtraction, not by adding knowledge, but by removing illusion, not by building identity, but by dissolving it. And yet, there is still something deeper, something even more radical hidden in Jesus' teachings. It is not merely about discovering that unity exists within, it is about understanding what must die for unity to be realized. In the next part, we will confront the most misunderstood teaching of all, the meaning of losing your life to save it. Within this paradox lies the true threshold of the monad. Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. These words have echoed for centuries, often interpreted as a call to sacrifice, even martyrdom. But what if Jesus was speaking of something far more interior and transformative? What if losing your life does not mean physical death, but the dissolution of the constructed self, the egoic identity that believes it is separate from the source? The Greek word translated as life in this passage is psyche, which can mean soul, identity, or the animating principle of the personality. To lose the psyche is not to annihilate being. It is to release the false center around which the personality revolves. This is the threshold. The monad, as described by Plotinus, cannot be approached by the divided mind. He wrote that the soul must stand alone and strip itself of all things. Not because things are evil, but because attachment fragments awareness. Fragmentation prevents unity. Unity requires simplicity. Jesus expressed the same truth in different language. "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself." Again, denial here is not repression, it is disidentification. It is recognizing that the roles, fears, ambitions, and narratives we cling to are not our deepest essence. Why do so many resist this teaching? Because the ego fears its own transparency. It fears silence. It fears surrender. It fears the realization that it is not the ultimate authority of the self. And yet, every mystical tradition converges on this point. The Desert Fathers of early Christianity withdrew into solitude not to escape the world, but to confront the illusions within themselves. In that confrontation, something false began to dissolve. Beneath it, they reported encountering a luminous stillness, a presence beyond thought. Modern scholar Richard Rohr has described this as the movement from the false self to the true self. The false self is constructed from social conditioning and psychological defenses. The true self, he argues, is hidden in God and participates in divine being. Though his language is contemporary, the essence mirrors ancient insight. Now consider the crucifixion from this perspective. Beyond its historical and theological dimensions, it also symbolizes the death of the divided self. The cross represents intersection, vertical and horizontal, heaven and earth, spirit and matter. To be crucified spiritually is to allow the false identity to be exposed and surrendered. But here is the deeper revelation. Jesus did not stop at death, he spoke of resurrection. And resurrection in mystical understanding is the emergence of consciousness unified with the source. Not the return of the old self, but the revelation of a deeper identity that was always present. Ask yourself what in you resists surrender. What part of you clings to control, recognition, certainty? Can you feel how tightly identity holds itself together? Entering the monad requires a passage through this interior death, not dramatic, not theatrical, often invisible to others, but profoundly real. And now we approach the most powerful insight of all, the culmination of everything we have explored. In the final part, we will uncover how Jesus did not merely describe the monad or hint at its existence. He embodied the living demonstration of what it means to awaken to it fully, and why this awakening is not reserved for one individual, but encoded as a possibility within every human being. The eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me. Meister Eckhart. Now we arrive at the heart of the mystery. If Jesus revealed how to enter the monad, it was not through secret rituals or hidden passwords. It was through embodiment, through becoming the living demonstration of unity realized. When he said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," this statement has often been interpreted as exclusivity, but in the mystical tradition, the way is not a personality to worship. It is a state of being to awaken into. The way is alignment. The truth is direct realization. The life is participation in the living source itself. Scholar Raymond Panikar wrote that Christ can be understood not only as a historical figure, but as a symbol of the union between divine and human consciousness. In this view, Jesus does not block the path to the monad. He reveals it by showing what happens when separation dissolves completely. This is why he could say, "The works that I do, you will do also." That is an extraordinary statement. It implies continuity. It implies that what he embodied is not unattainable. It implies that the state of unity is latent within human consciousness. Here is the final and most powerful revelation. Entering the monad is not about ascending somewhere else. It is about recognizing that your deepest identity has never been separate from it. The barrier was never distance. The barrier was identification. Jesus constantly redirected attention inward. When you pray, go into your inner room and close the door. That inner room is not architectural. It is awareness withdrawn from multiplicity. It is the silent center beneath thought. In that stillness, the illusion of fragmentation begins to collapse. The monad is absolute simplicity, pure being, pure awareness. It cannot be grasped as an object because it is the ground of the one who is grasping. It cannot be seen as something outside because it is the light by which seeing happens. This is why the final step is not effort, it is surrender. Not surrender as defeat, but surrender as recognition. The recognition that what you truly are is not the restless mind, not the fluctuating emotions, not the story accumulated over years. Beneath all of that is awareness itself, undivided, silent, whole. Jesus did not teach escape from the world, he taught transformation of perception. When perception becomes unified, the world is no longer experienced as fragmented. Love ceases to be obligation and becomes the natural expression of unity recognized. Ask yourself now with complete honesty, if the kingdom is within you, if unity is your deepest nature, what prevents you from turning inward and discovering it directly? What if the door has always been open? What if entering the monad is not the achievement of the extraordinary, but the remembrance of what you have always been?